You, I looked back at a March 2001 review of Present Dangers, which was a collection of essays put together by Robert Kagan and Bill Kristol.
Right.
And at the end of that review, you point out a number of omissions. Um, one of which is the omission of any discussion of the economic factors driving globalization. And now that we have a BlackRock executive running our China policy for the Biden administration, that reality looms very large, obviously. But what really arrested my attention is at the end, you point out that ambitious, globe bestriding ambitions were really a province of the American elite, and that the American public, circa, you know, in January of 2001, had no interest whatsoever of spending blood and treasure on these foreign projects, this Wilsonian idealism. And it's interesting. I think 9/11 you would think it would be a setback, an attack on our country, but it really was a golden opportunity because the public then shifted very, very forcefully behind this kind of global project, at least for
Well,
a decent interval.
yeah, an interval. I mean, it did shift and it didn't shift. What I mean by didn't shift is that uh, there was my interpretation, there was a brief burst of enthusiasm for the war. Let's go get the bad guys. Let's go punish those who committed this horrific crime, and it was a horrific crime. But you recall, there was no mobilization of the country.
No, we were told to go shopping.
Explicitly told to go shopping.
Yes, I know. I remember that.
And that remains, I think, a very telling sort of moment. So there may have been some cheering from the sidelines, but the American people didn't really sign up to participate in the war. And I think that there are many reasons why the global war on terrorism didn't pan out. But I mean, among those many reasons is the fact that by 2004, 2005, we found ourselves with too much war and too few soldiers. And as the generals struggled with finding a solution to the very difficult problems that we ourselves had created in Afghanistan and Iraq, the fact that there were never enough soldiers, I think, was part of not a sole explanation, but part of the problem. We tried to respond by recruiting allies, a few of which responded with much enthusiasm. NATO was part of the war in Afghanistan, but NATO was, I think, by everybody's evaluation, did not do well in Afghanistan. The effort to put together, what did Rumsfeld call it? The coalition of the willing.
Coalition, I remember
establishing a coalition of the willing to fight the war in Iraq. Well, it turned out that there weren't too many people who were all that willing. We tried to hire mercenaries. We did hire mercenaries. We called them defense contractors, tens of thousands of them. But all of that package together didn't produce an effective military force.
So your sense is that this split remained, even though it was covered over by a kind of burst of enthusiasm. It continue. I think it probably continues to define our situation. I mean, living in New York, it's clear that Hollywood, Silicon Valley, New York, these are Washington, D.C., these are command posts in the global system, global economy. And, clearly powerful people here have a very powerful interest in sustaining the global system. And our military and American power is crucial. It's the underpinning of that system.
I think that's right, and I'm shifting gears on you now away from the global war on terrorism. But I think as we the country, wrestles with the question of how to respond to the challenge of China and how does military power figure in that uh, problem. Uh, Again, it's there's no easy answers. Certainly, the American people have no particular interest in a war with the People's Republic. Uh, and I think what we see from the Pentagon is, and we've seen this in the past, an effort to figure out how advanced technology can provide a shortcut to the creation of a militarily effective response to a security challenge. I myself, I guess I'm kind of agnostic, but I certainly don't see how technology is going to provide that response. I don't. I myself do not view China as an existential threat. I think we've got to share the planet with them. I don't think that's going to be easy to figure out what are the terms of the sharing. But I'm very wary of defining the relationship primarily in military terms. I don't think I don't think that's going to lead to a happy outcome.
What about Ukraine? I guess the Russians invaded in the final days of February, is my recollection.
Yeah,
But boy, the feeling I had in March was that I was surrounded by hysterical people uh, that were like anything to do anything. And that struck me as a dangerous moment, actually.
I mean
Um,
the hysterical people that wanted to do anything in order to strike back at Russia.
yeah,
Mhm.
the send the MiGs
Right.
to maybe. I mean, didn't the Wall Street Journal publish something about, you know, uh, bruiting the possibility of a limited nuclear exchange? And I can't remember all these, but it was this general. Fortunately, it seems to have abated, and the administration, the president, seemed to be willing to tamp down, overly, any kind of measures that might lead to escalation. But at least our mainstream press, certainly has drunk deeply at the well of what you call the old Wilsonian temptation.
Oh, I think there's no doubt about it. I mean, let me try not to say anything that suggests that I'm sympathetic to Vladimir Putin. I'm not. The war began with an act of aggression. He's brutal. Uh, I happen to think that the war could have been avoided. That a an effective negotiation could have satisfied Russian basic Russian national security interests. Uh, Probably would have involved neutralizing Ukraine. There was some talk of that early on. Now it's gone by the board. And I suppose you could say, so what? We didn't avoid the war. The war happened. Uh, I don't claim to be a military expert. It's been decades since I was in the army, but it was fascinating, I think, to watch how the expectations of a quick and easy Russian victory were foiled by events on the ground and the really staggering incompetence of the Russian army. It was one of those things you couldn't believe
It was very
that they were so
reassuring.
bad. Pardon?
I agree. I found the first week to be very reassuring. In other
And
words,
let us not take credit away from the Ukrainians.
exactly.
Gallant resistance, determined to defend their country. Uh,
And if I could interject here, also as my discussion with my friends, I'm a I'm a skeptic. I think, as you are, of neo-imperial foreign policy. But the Ukraine, those first weeks did indicate that people were willing to die to stay part of our system, or the one that we constructed. I mean, they want to defend the integrity of their own country,
wait.
but they.
So I'm not. I don't know that I would follow you beyond that.
Okay, go ahead.
They're willing to they're willing to die for the West.
No,
I
this
don't
for
know.
their
I
own
don't know that
country,
that's the case.
but they want it clear. It seems as though they want to be they're willing to resist the Russian aggression. Obviously, out of a patriotic sense, but also, they want to be part of our the system that we've constructed. And the
Yes, I think
Europeans too,
yes.
they've been a kind of a sobering up, like, well, wait a minute, we can complain about the Americans, but ultimately, we prefer the thing that's been built up for the last 75 years to the alternatives.
And I'll come across as more cynical than I am here when I say that I think to some degree the Ukrainian political leadership has seized upon the war as an opportunity to make Ukraine's case for becoming part of the West.
Mm.
Whether that's going to pan out or not, I don't know. I gather that the process of joining the EU is complicated and lengthy. I think that I believe it requires unanimity
Yeah, I
to
think all the
admit a new nation to NATO. I'm not sure that's going to happen anytime soon. But in every disaster, there's an opportunity, and I suspect that something of what's going on in the inner precincts of Ukrainian politics is to try to get some positive results out of this horrific disaster. My own sense is that it is a horrific disaster.
certainly for the
And
Ukrainian people, it's their country's being destroyed.
exactly, and that's why what disturbs me, I think, is the attitude that seems to prevail in Washington, and then where smart people congregate, where the imperative of bringing this war to an end as soon as possible takes a backseat to other sorts of calculations of punishing Putin. Uh, that I think it becomes immoral.
No, I share
Where
that.
are the diplomatic efforts to end this thing so that we don't have more people being killed and more cities being destroyed? That has become an afterthought.
No, I agree. I mean, there was kind of cheap talk about making this, the Afghanistan for the Russians. It's going to be their version of Afghanistan in the 80s for the Soviets,
Hmm.
which means, 10 years of war.
Right,
And so what we're going to volunteer the Ukrainians to basically,
right.
die a slow, bloody death over 10 years so that we can gain some geopolitical advantages over Russia.
Yeah, I
It's a
mean,
pretty
people are not
cynical
going to say
approach.
that out loud, but that does seem to be the thrust of U.S. policy. Uh, I don't know. Who are the peacemakers? I think the Pope. I haven't followed what the Pope's been saying, but I think the Pope has tried to avoid being drawn into becoming a partisan
Yes.
in this
Yeah.
war,
I think
uh,
that's
and
correct. Yes.
and to do what he can to foster conditions for a settlement. It's not evident to me that his efforts have produced much of substance.